time to talk matters African. Welcome to the show. It's always a pleasure to have you with us. Now, tonight we continue our discussions on women in political leadership, but we expand our focus to look at gender mainstreaming. What does that mean? Stay with us for more on that. We get your views on the issues as well, and as always, we have Africa's Top 10. You're watching the Africa Leadership Dialogues. I'm Julie Gichuru. On the show this week, another panel of incredible African women doing different things in the political space, but also in the development space and in the faith space as well. And so we start our introductions of our panel with June Nderitu. June is the Social Development Officer of the Council of Anglican Provinces in Africa, CAPA. She's also the Africa Regional Facilitator of the Anglican Alliance. Also on our panel this week, we have Honorable Salaamu Musumba, who is the Governor of Kamulu District in Uganda. And we have Winnie Maru, who is the Program Officer of the Forum for Young Women in Politics. She's vied for the position of MP for Turbo in Uasin Gishu County, that's in Kenya. She's the Secretary for Programs in the National Women's Congress for the party URP.
This event was held in partnership with Urgent Action Fund Africa and ICES Wiki, which seek to amplify women's participation, voices, and power.
I want each of us to give a perspective on what gender mainstreaming means. There's a lot of conversation around women's political representation. But the whole issue is, I think, a little bit wider. Also, there's a question of youth and youth participation as well, which is a critical issue in Africa. But if you were to talk, Winnie, about gender mainstreaming, what would you highlight as the important factors that people need to keep in mind?
First and foremost, we need to understand, a lot of the times when we talk about gender mainstreaming, there's the myth that gender mainstreaming is to do with bringing women on board. Now, we need to understand that gender is not only about women. Of course, it has been made to look like gender is always about women. But we have the male gender and we have the female ones. So a lot of the times when we say gender mainstreaming, we look at it from a women's perspective because as of now, women are coming from a very disadvantaged point of view. But we also need to understand that men also need to come to the table because the experiences and the needs and aspirations of women and men differ. So a lot of the times we're bringing women to the table, but we're not also trying to understand what would be the need of a man on that table. And men tend to forget about women because I guess it comes naturally for them to do things forgetting about women. So as women, we want to make sure that we are in those spaces, that we're taking part in those activities. So of course we will insist that gender mainstreaming has to involve women, because men are usually at that table, women are never at that table.
Let me come to you, Salaamu, and the whole issue of legal frameworks is critical. Last week on the show, we talked a lot about the importance of ensuring we are entrenching quota systems, for instance, and affirmative action into our laws. And for now, maybe they apply to women. Perhaps one day they will apply to men. We don't know. The question now is, even as we're applying or passing these laws, are we implementing the laws that we are now passing? What's your experience been?
What we need to understand and appreciate is that gender mainstreaming is actually resetting the balance, the gender balance. And it's correcting long held traditions and cultural constructions that have held one gender in a disadvantaged parking yard. And so when we reset the balance is to create a healthy society. The promoters at different levels aim at achieving different targets. But over time, the laws should be able to bring about gender parity and therefore set a healthy social environment in which we all blossom as humanity. The challenge is for us of today to grow that platform that sets the right balance, that sets a healthy balance for the next community. For now, we are just correcting the imbalances of the past, but we should get beyond that. And I'm always encouraged by the solemn declaration of gender parity. But of course, it's just a declaration, it's a wish. Many of these things have been left on the papers, they've been written, they've not been activated, they've not been used to create that social security that Africa so desperately needs to move the continent. And so I'm looking at legislation, not just to reset the social balance, but to create dividends of this balance that helps Africa to use all its energy, to use all its talent, to use all its capability. And so the challenge is actually us, who are reshaping the agenda today, who are setting the goals for the future, not to replicate, to create a new situation of imbalance. And that's why you see that on the continent we are experiencing more gender-based violence, because the men have been displaced in some spaces and they just don't know how to navigate a place where they don't have opportunity, a place where they don't have advantage. And so that creates another problem. I think we have the knowledge, we have the foresight to make the right balance and therefore use the space we are in today not to create new gender imbalances.
That is a very powerful statement right then. We're going to come back to that issue of gender parity, even when it comes to the opportunities for the boys, for the men who perhaps are feeling hopeless. We'll come back to that. But first, let me come to you, June, now. And the question of faith-based organizations and gender parity, I mean, just like private sector, just like government, it is struggling. Yeah. What are your thoughts on your particular space and what it can contribute to this discussion in Africa today?
Thank you for that question, Julie. The truth of the matter is that patriarchy is not removed from the faith space. And we have witnessed that even at every level, apart from maybe organizations that have been traditionally women organizations, like the women groups in the church, where you'll find it's all women. But I'll start by saying that a very famous saying that we say in our line of work, that when you ignore women, you ignore half of God's creation. Because we come from a point where women were created equal to men. And it is stated very clearly in the first book of the scriptures that we ascribe to, which is the Bible. And so anytime you ignore the giftings, anything that women can bring to the table, then you're really ignoring half of God's creation. And if it's women who hold, the sky on their heads, then that means half of the sky is going to fall. And so for us, our teachings continuously affirm the importance of women as people with gifts, talents, who have purpose. Yet the same teachings have actually been misconstrued to oppress women. It is important for us not to confuse culture of the Bible times with the actual principles that are within those scriptures.
Let's go back to the issue that you raised, that even as we talk about gender mainstreaming, we must ensure that we don't create new inequities, that we don't make imbalances, that we don't create new problems, even as we move forward. And so let's just touch on this issue of the boy child in a society where definitely the girl child is still disadvantaged. And it seems there are now programs to empower the girl child and bring her up to par with the boy child, and yet something is going wrong with our boy child. There are problems. If you speak to schools, you will hear schools saying participation by boys is decreasing. They seem to be pulling back. There's a lack of confidence. We're seeing in some of our societies the sexual violence is on the increase, and we know this is a power crime. We're seeing increased single-parent families, so mothers bringing up sons and struggling to be a mother and a father at the same time. How do we ladies address this issue to ensure when we say gender mainstreaming, we mean equality for both men and women and no one seeking to rise above the other? Perhaps I'll start with you.
I would start by saying that at least I'm happy that you do recognize that women first are disadvantaged more than, or the girl child is disadvantaged more than the boy
Certainly.
child. And I would look at it from the angle that when you look at the number of girls and boys in primary school, the girls could be more, but when you come to secondary school, the boys are more than the girls. So somehow we have girls not going on to secondary school, but then we have boys going on to secondary school. So how I would look at it would be from the angle that in as much as we have worked hard, and I know I'm talking to myself as well, because I've worked really in promoting the girl child. The boy child, I would not even say is a matter of a lack of confidence. I would look at it from an angle where we don't have, father figures. Sometimes, and as you rightly put it, mothers who are bringing up sons, we do have some boys who end up, behaving like girls or like to hang out with girls, and and they're not doing the boy kind of thing. So of course they don't grow up to be the men who we aspire them to be, the strong men who are caring for the women, because that's really what we need to see in society, men taking care of women, and that's the role that they're not doing. If anything, they're now the perpetrator of the violence. So yes, I guess we have not done our part in trying to protect, or is it nurture the boy child the way that he should be. But for me, I would...
Whose responsibility is it now?
And that's what I'm saying. I think men in society, because we're having girls giving birth to children, and men are not taking responsibility for those kids.
So men need to stand up.
Yes, men also need to stand up and take care of the girls.
Your thoughts, Salama, on this issue?
I think it's the grooming, it's the family dysfunctionality, the community dysfunctionality, and our absence in those places. I do recall I would find my mother at home any day, any time, but my children don't find me at home. They spend more time on TV or in these things, and so
on these things.
Yeah, these things. And so we have displaced ourselves from the lives of our children at the time they most need us, because we are doing everything it takes to be career women, successful women, and the DNA and the biology just makes us the people to bring up the children. The DNA of men is different. And I think we need to appreciate it. But they have also absconded from duty. They also have responsibilities. They do and a key role to play. They have a key role, especially in adolescence at that time. And that's when they're absent. And so these gaping absences have hurt us all. So we need to reconstruct a new community. We need to reconstruct a new socialization that meets the new challenges we have as parents. When you risk leaving your children to TV, the media is not family friendly anymore. It's just driven by commerce, and we need to find administrative mechanisms that compel media houses to have time and space for children. Radios, if they told stories like our mothers told us stories as we grew up, maybe that could be replaced with the media at the appropriate time before dinner. And so we need to reset the socialization process so that it is children friendly. As a continent, we have stabilized. We should now go back and construct a society for the 21st century.
Well, we have stabilized. We need to now reconstruct.
Correct.
Speaking of reconstruction, June, where does it begin? Where does the primary buck stop? Is it at the family structure? Is it with our faith-based organ? Is it with our churches and our mosques and our temples? Is it with government? When we talk about re-socialization, where does that begin?
The truth of the matter is, I feel that there has been a lot of role modeling for girls, a lot of push to empower girls without the same proportion for the boys. Because the assumption is they've always had it anyway, let them carry on. We are trying to catch up as women. But it seemed to communicate, this empowerment of girls seemed to communicate the opposite to men, that these people are out to finish us. And unfortunately, that has resulted in a lot of violence of all kinds and at all levels, starting in the family. For me, I'd say, from my perspective, it is to understand for men, women, boys, and girls, what is the role of each in the society, in the family, in the community? What is the role? Because those roles have been predefined. They are there. The roles exist. Everybody has space. And I like what was said in the last week's program, that there's enough power for everybody. There's enough power for men, for women, for boys and girls. If only we would help every man and every woman to understand that, then I think we can start to kind of reload, to reboot, and to, you know, we say reloaded, families reloaded, where men actually now realize that the empowerment of women does not mean the disempowerment of men. It means that now we have stronger women for a better society.
Yeah.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
A couple of things I say to young people when I speak to them, and especially to men, is maybe nobody tells the boys that your seed is important. Yeah. That don't plant your seed everywhere and bring up your progeny, children you will never know. That is an injustice you are doing to yourself. And so invest in family, invest in a woman you will spend your life with and bring up your children, which perhaps is a start of families that work, of reloaded families, of being present. And for many men who are not present in their children's lives, it's a tragedy for many families. If you are a man and you can stand up and be a mentor for other young boys or girls, please stand up and take that position. Right now, I think in many of our communities, there's a huge gap. We want to take questions from our audience. So anybody who has, yes, thank you.
We have to admit that the entire global social order has been destroyed. We have an economic system that has inserted basically a world order and a social order which is about the law of the jungle. It's the fittest, you know, the ones who can grab the most who survive, who get to have power. Society gets socialized to aspire to that kind of power, which is about violence, which is about taking everything, and which is about emasculating entire majorities of people. So it is important that we are deep in our understanding of what has happened and what are the roots causes of the emasculation of men.
I'm called Amon Winnie Ashava from Makerere University. Thanks, panelists, for the interesting discussion that you're bringing on board. Mine is a comment largely from the concept of gender mainstreaming and the level of commitment that our governments have paid to it. And I think we have seen a sort of inadequate commitment by our nation states to the whole process of gender mainstreaming. And these nation states are hiding into quite a covert process, which, if you're not careful, you may not be able to tell that it is a form of resistance to gender mainstreaming. They have all policies on board. They talk about it on a daily basis. They go ahead to make, pronouncements on public rallies and etc. But when it comes to committing human and financial resources to do the actual implementation that would lead to changes in the lives of people, they have not gone as far as that.
Very powerful comments. We're having a hot debate this week, certainly, and thank you all for sharing your views. Ladies, a powerful, powerful statement made there, and I don't think I've ever heard this from anybody, that in fact, men are disempowered by the same structures that disempower women. That it's patriarchal societies that disempower people, because it's survival of the fittest, and whether you're a man or a woman, if you're not the fittest, you don't survive. Fascinating thoughts. Thank you so much for sharing your views. Also, the concept that while our governments have signed up to certain quotas and certain targets, maybe a lot of this is just for show. Maybe when it comes to maintaining the status quo, there are people who don't want to see change. And so things simply don't change. If the structures are there, but they're not acted upon, if the laws are there, but they're not implemented, then it really means nothing. I'd like your take, each of you, on these comments that have been shared. And then finally, we'll give our final thoughts on the way forward for gender mainstreaming. And this time, Juna, I'll start with you.
I could say briefly that for any policy to be seen to be succeeding, that favors, gender parity, I think one of the marks is how much that government commits to it. It's the aspects of gender budgeting. And so I would say that it's up to citizens, men and women alike, to actually track down how much of each and every budget line actually goes to funding an aspect of gender parity, or that is for empowerment of women and girls.
I won't leave you, June, before we tackle the question of patriarchal societies that actually disempower the majority. It's only a minority who survive or thrive in the structures that we have dominating many of our communities and states in the world today. What are your thoughts on that?
I think I tend to agree with Sipo in the sense that that kind of pressure, when it is exerted on the whole of society, really, it is survival for the fittest. It tends to create, I'd say, a kind of scarcity mentality where if I have, that means you don't. And if you have, that means I don't. That is whether it is resources, whether it is power, whatever aspect it is. It creates that aspect of you grab it all, means you're on top.
A flawed perspective?
It is flawed.
Okay.
Definitely.
Let me come to you now, Salaamu, and your thoughts on the comments that we've heard.
Well, I don't think that the debate on gender mainstreaming is meant to take us at a point of denial of who we are and the identity of who we are and what we do. It's actually to appreciate that we have to reset the gender roles and the gender contribution that we make. And so for me, I'd like to see a construction of another society made by ourselves, because our traditional society was really quite fair. It was kind, and it was promotional, because it would be a high risk to leave the women out.
Paint the picture of that traditional society.
That traditional society is...
For those who don't feel they're in the know. And what's your perspective of what a traditional society was?
What happened, I'll tell you that when a man chose to take on another wife, it was with the permission of the first wife. It wasn't in hiding.
And it wasn't abandoning one family. In fact, there was an obligation.
It was an obligation.
That you look after both your families.
Correct. And at times in my community, it was my grandmother who went to look for her younger sister because she couldn't cope with the man. And so she wanted space. She wanted space to be. And so how do we want to construct this new community with all the socio-economic trappings that we are caught up in? And how can we grow on what used to make us survive? Because it has always been a law of the jungle out there. Now that we have not died, it means we are strong. And therefore, we must grow the strength. How in the future will this strength be exercised? It's when it's shared. It's shared, and it's a very intricate area we are going into in how to construct the new power relations. But also it means we have to deconstruct the other one. Bury it and then grow another one.
I have no doubt there are a lot of women tweeting now or sharing their views on calling other women in to help, and maybe the modern conveniences mean we can do it all these days and don't need to, and certainly don't need to ask for help. But I'll move on now, Winnie, to your thoughts.
What is the goal of gender mainstreaming? When we're talking about gender mainstreaming, what really is the goal? And I would look at the goal to mean it's a transformation of unequal social and institutional structures into an equal and just institutional structure. Now, we're talking from a point where women have ordinarily been here and men have been here. So even for us to talk about equality, when we are so far below the table, for me, does not even begin to arise. We need to bring women to this level where then we are actually, you know, we are talking from the same level and we are at equal structures to then say, this is what we require and this is what we need. But as of now, trying to say that, you know, there's this particular ones who feel that they've been disempowered because women have been rising up, when men have been way, you know, they've passed the line, they've gone. Women have not even reached near the line for us to even start talking about, you know, them reaching that
Let's
level.
talk about the issue that has been raised by our colleague from Uganda on you know, I think the question is measurables. He says, you know, people are simply not implementing, and that's the fact. We're paying lip service, and he called it, how did you describe it? There's a resistance.
Institutional resistance.
Institutional resistance.
I totally agree.
How do we ensure that institutional resistance is put to an end once and for all?
The first, of course, would be legislation and putting in policy structures. But I'll take an example here in Kenya. We used to have the Ministry of Gender. We now have a new government in place who did away with the Ministry of Gender. So, you know, for starters, I wouldn't even know what to say. Are we going ahead? Are we going back? But what the government told us is that they would gender mainstream that into every ministry and not necessarily have a ministry dedicated to gender issues. For us, we took it that that ministry actually looked at and made sure that women, you know, are being mainstreamed. So now we've been told that it's going to be mainstreamed into every ministry. And that's why I'm saying I would like to agree with him, because first and foremost, we don't have data. We don't know what the government has done.
So my question,
I agree.
My
it's a
question,
lot of lip service.
What needs to be done? So perhaps each of you could give us a view on this. Very briefly, what must be done? We lament the problems that we have today, but perhaps we can construct the way forward. What would you think?
We need to put our government in check. We really need to rise up as women and put the government in check. You know, let it be seen to be doing what it said it would do.
Be seen to be doing and
do it,
yes.
And not just say it. But we really need as women to put the government in check. You know, I mean, we should not sleep back on our laurels, but we really need to wake up.
So citizen action is part of that process.
Yes.
Your thoughts, Salama?
Yeah, we have sisters in all these spaces, and therefore each of us should do their part. If it's to unpack the budgets, I don't think we are short of capacity. We share the blame for not being able to put government to check, because we are government too. The people who write the budgets are colleagues. And therefore, we have ourselves to check ourselves and set the goal. What do we want to achieve in the next financial year? Set the target and achieve it, because I believe we can achieve it. We have women in all the right places. We have a Speaker of Parliament in Uganda. We have a Minister of Gender in Uganda. We are in the right places. So I don't think that we can pass the buck on that one. If we have missed the tracking, I think it's to check ourselves and go back and check the budgets. The civil society should, because they have the capability. We have the capacity, we have the know-how, we have the commitments, the resolutions. Let's just go and compel everybody to do what needs to be done.
What they need to be done, and measure performance targets, measurables. Yes. June, your thoughts?
I think briefly, without just repeating, it's vigilance, vigilance, vigilance. We tend to complain after the budgets have already been passed, that they are not gender sensitive. But when you're called for budget conferences and all these hearings and all these public hearings about budgets, no one goes. So who is going to check whether, there's those concerns that have been placed there? So I think let's not complain. Let's be vigilant. Get into the kitchen when it's being cooked. Right. Don't make noise about what has already been put on the table.
And there are women in the kitchen, and it takes one voice at the table to make a difference. It takes one voice. Ladies, to close now, please look into the camera, and for millions who are watching, share your message on the way forward for the continent on gender mainstreaming. What do each of us need to do in our positions, in our spheres of influence? Winnie, I'll start with you in that camera, please.
What I'd like to say is, first and foremost, women's rights are human rights. Women too are humans, and we should look at them as people who can participate, are able to participate in decision making, should be included because it is important and it is necessary to have women at every sphere of society, political, economical, and social, just to ensure that this world, to bring a difference into this world that we live in.
Thank you so much. Please, Salama.
Yes, I'm looking at a secure Africa, a secure humanity, and that can only be achieved by gender parity, with all of us playing our part and with all of us unleashing our energy towards the effort of a rising Africa.
If you want to fail in any sphere of life, whether it is public or private, ignore the women and the girls.
Stay with the Africa Leadership Dialogues.
Powerful. Now let's get your views on the issues.
This week we asked you, how can Africa ensure parity between men and women and greater collective efforts towards stability and prosperity? Jared Ohenga says, by making sure women have a real voice in all governance institutions so that they can participate equally with men in public dialogue and decision-making process.
My name is Gichuru. I'm watching African Leadership Dialogue from Langata. I'd like to give my opinion on the question, how can Africa ensure parity between men and women and greater collective efforts towards stability and prosperity? Firstly, through the provision of a third gender rule. This is to the effect that every organization in Kenya offering leadership positions, a third of those positions should go to women. Secondly, the matrimonial property bill. In the past, women are discriminated on the basis of gender to the effect that they could not be able to inherit property in all owned land. This has been changed by the new matrimonial property bill that women can be able to own property and also inherit land. Thirdly, women are able to run for government positions. This is to the effect that currently in Kenya we have 5 cabinet women secretaries, and in countries such as Malawi and Liberia we're able to learn that women are given leadership opportunities. Fourthly, women representatives. The Constitution provides for the post of women representatives to the effect that every county in Kenya should have a position for the women representatives.
To join our conversation, go to our G+ page, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Facebook, Africa Leadership Dialogues, on Twitter, @AfricaLD, and on WhatsApp, send your video comments to +254 715 816 033.
Time now for Africa's Top 10.
On Africa's Top 10 this week, we feature the top African heroines. Starting us off at number 10 is Fatima Ahmed Ibrahim, a co-founder of the Sudanese Women's Union, SWU. The union organized to secure the right to legal status, the right to consent to marriage, and right to vote. Today, countless Sudanese women have joined the struggle for equality, democracy, and human rights. Coming in at number 9 is the late Salwa Bugaiges of Libya. As a civil and women's rights activist, Salwa braved the streets against the heavy-handed response during the uprising against Colonel Gaddafi. She spoke of the dangers posed by the Islamist groups and the failures since Gaddafi was ousted. As a lawyer, she spoke of the urgent need for the rule of law. She was assassinated in June 2014. Taking the number 8 spot is Grace Yane, founder and executive director of the Women Movement for Sustainable Development in Liberia. Grace works with HIV-positive women to build their financial capacity and self-esteem. She is also in the thick of things in matters of post-conflict reconstruction processes in Liberia. At number 7 is the late Wangare Maathai. She founded the Greenbelt movement as a movement to fight quick-back development and deforestation. It also seeks to combat rural unemployment and low self-esteem by providing jobs with reforestation and voter registration. Dr. Josephine Odumakin from Nigeria comes in at number 6. Dr. Odumakin has been on the forefront of over 2,000 cases of violations of women's rights, including cases of extrajudicial practices committed by government security agencies against women. She is currently the executive director of the Institute of Human Rights and Democratic Studies. Positioned at number 5 is Margaret Dongo. Margaret was part of the guerrilla movement that fought to liberate Zimbabwe from the British colonial rule. In 2010, Margaret, together with the Zimbabwe Women Lawyers Association, ensured the ruling by the courts that men and women can both apply for legal documents of their children, which was previously done only by men. Slotted in at number 4 is Betty Bigombe from Uganda. For nearly 2 decades, Betty Bigombe went to great lengths to ensure that peace was restored in the northern part of Uganda that is being inhabited by the Lord's Resistance Army, LRA. She founded the Betty Bigombe Foundation, a not-for-profit organization working to improve the living conditions of the disadvantaged in regions affected by war. Taking the number 3 spot is Neema Namadamu from the Democratic Republic of Congo. She founded the Maman Shujaa of Congo, which seeks to encourage and support peace within Congo. It also seeks to prioritize human rights for all, rights for nature, and rights to the future of children. Neema is crippled from polio, proving that disability is not inability. Coming in at number 2 is Her Excellency Margaret Kenyatta, the current First Lady of Kenya. With the dwindling maternal and child health outcomes in the country, the First Lady launched the Beyond Zero campaign that seeks to improve both maternal and child health and also helps accelerate the implementation of the national plan towards the elimination of new HIV infections among children. And at number 1 this week is Esther Madudu from Uganda. Esther is AMREF's nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize 2015. She's an enrolled midwife by the government of Uganda, working at the Atiriri Health Center for. Her duties include antenatal and maternity services. Following training from AMREF, Esther together with 2 other midwives are able to deliver 45 to 50 babies every month at the health center. And that's Africa's Top 10 this week.
As always, we've come to the end of the show, and we always share words of wisdom with you. Sometimes it's a quote, sometimes it's a proverb, and we break with tradition this week. It's not an African quote or proverb. This week it's a Mexican proverb shared with us by one of the participants here today. Over to you.
They tried to bury us. They didn't know we were seeds.
Need we say more? Blessings to you and blessings to Africa.